Good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. I believe it is Wednesday. It's a reasonable day. Wednesday, I think, is one of the rougher days because, you're in the middle of the week. Monday, you have a lot to do. Tuesday, it's like, okay, where are we? Wednesday, what happened to my... chair got messed up. Wednesday is the day where you really have to get to work. If you're not going to get to work on Wednesday, you probably messed up. So today is the work day. Today we have a poker coaching webinar. If you're not part of the poker coaching following, I don't know, members, I don't know what to call you all. We have a webinar at 10 a.m., so you better turn in your homework ASAP. I went to go do my homework yesterday, and I realized I did it a month ago. It's always nice whenever you sit down, you're ready to do like a 2-hour homework question, and then I realize, I already did it. It's important to do your homework early. When will I announce the result of the CSOP? Well, the winner already knows it's him. We're sending out an email soon. If you don't know it's you, it's not you. Sorry. For those who don't know, I've been doing many giveaways. So far, we've given away a Mid-States Poker Tour main event seat, a Heartland Poker Tour main event seat, a bunch of poker coaching memberships. We just gave away an entry to the Charity Series of Poker, a flight to Vegas, a hotel room, and multiple re-entries. So that's great. I'm glad to hear that someone won that. Maybe they're here in chat on Instagram, maybe they're not. But yeah, so that's all good. I'm happy that we're able to give away these things. I mean, I realize that we are giving away lots and lots of cash, which is expensive, but, it gets in front of new people, and it's a good way to give back to all of you. I appreciate everything you all do for me, and, we're doing great, and it's good to be able to give back to all of you. So, make sure you're on my email list. An easy way to get on it is to get your free trial at pokercoaching.com, and then you can be entered into all of these giveaways. We're considering giving away a World Series of Poker main event seat. In order for that to happen, we have to make sure these giveaways are doing well for us. But, maybe that will get some attention. Maybe that would be great for me to meet one of you out in Vegas. We'll see if we get there. There's still a few more months before that. But we gave away a Charity Series of Poker seats. Thanks to Matt Stout there for helping us be able to give away a hotel room and multiple reentries and all of that. All right. So, today, before we get started, if you enjoy this, a little coffee, make sure you like, subscribe, share, or retweet, whatever you can do to share a little coffee. This does take a little bit of my time, as you all see, but I think you all enjoy it, and I'm happy to help. So, please share this with your friends. If it turns out people enjoy this, I'm happy to do it. But if no one likes it, well, we'll pack it up eventually. But so far, I know at least 8 of you are watching this today. So, I'm happy to help out all 8 of you. All right, we had a question sent in. How has the player pool changed since solvers have been invented? And I want to answer instead a different question. How has poker changed in general? Well, when poker first started out, a long time ago in France and probably well before that, poker was generally thought to be another one of these, another one of the casino games, right? It was thought to be like roulette, where people just went there, they splashed around, they gambled, and they saw who won. And very often that's how most games start. Most games start off from the point of view of this is a gambling game when there is obvious uncertainty involved. And there's obvious uncertainty involved in poker. Eventually, though, people realized there's some skill in this. Let's talk about the Doyle Brunson days, right? Back then, most people were loose and passive. They wanted to see the flop and then put their money in when they obviously had a good hand. Most people did not understand what an obvious good hand was. They would think something like top pair, top kicker was the nuts, and they would just blast their money in. But if they had worse than that, they would fold to bets. They would flop pairs and they would just fold to bets. Doyle talks about this in Super System. Very old book, but certainly has some advice in it. And back then, all you really had to do was just be generally kind of loose and kind of aggressive. A lot of people would fold to aggression, unless they had the nuts. If they had the nuts, they would raise you. It was just really easy to play because your opponents would fold every time they had nothing, and they would raise you every time they had the nuts. Playing against players like that is incredibly easy. If that's what you do, you're messing up. Those are by far the easiest players to beat, just by playing reasonable cards and being somewhat aggressive. So, then, Mike says, that's why Stu Unger and Doyle ran everyone over at the table. Yeah, they folded too much, right? Back then, the 4-bet worked extra well. You know, believe it or not, I actually don't think the 4-bet worked well at all. Doyle talks about this in his book. And essentially what he said is something to the effect of when people 3-bet, they had aces, kings, queens, or ace-king. If they have aces, kings, queens, or ace-king, then you don't want to 4-bet because they're never folding, right? Micah says, you have my audio book. Where can you get the ranges? I say the website of where to get the ranges in the book about 100 times. So go to that URL. If you still can't find it, email me at support@pokercoaching.com. All right, from China, this is a question we're not going to address now. Ask me later, and we will get to it. Okay, so when people 3-bet, they just had the nuts, so you fold. When they check raise you on the flop, they have the nuts, so you fold, right? Against players like that, you don't have to do anything fancy. Just listen to what they're telling you, right? You're going to find that very often those are the players you're still playing against today at 1-2 no limit or $100 buy-in local tournaments. These are players who typically only play in an honest, straight-up manner. And against players like that, you really don't have to do anything fancy besides just listen to what they're saying. All right. So, what strategy does particularly well against that? Well, Doyle's strategy, but also the old Harrington on Hold'em strategy. This strategy is great against awful players. You're going to clean up against awful players playing like this because you listen to what they're saying. However, this does not work so well against players who are decent or other people who are using this quote-unquote Harrington strategy, right? You're just going to break even against the Harrington strategy players, and you're going to get demolished by the players who are good because they're not going to give you honest information. And as we have moved closer and closer towards perfect play, people tend to not give honest information because they understand that is so detrimental, right? So, whenever I first started writing my first book, Secrets of Professional Tournament Poker, I taught essentially how to play like a smart, loose, aggressive player. And this is the strategy that I learned that demolishes people who play like Harrington on Hold'em suggest. And whenever I first started playing, back in 2003 to probably 2009 or 10, that's all you needed to do to beat literally everyone. Just play aggressive, play smart, but realize that most people are trying to understand what your bets mean. And if you can make them read into that completely incorrectly, you're going to crush them. And so that's what I did. Back then, people played the Harrington on Hold'em strategy, which is quite poor against people who are anywhere near decent, and they got crushed by me and everyone else rather similar to me, right? So, you're going to find that just generally being a smart, loose, aggressive player leads to you being winners in almost all games, as long as you can listen to what the weak, straightforward players are saying, and also you can push around the generally tight, aggressive players. You're going to do well. And this will often work until you're playing medium and even some high-stakes games, because you're going to be breaking even against the good, loose, aggressive players who are doing the same thing, and you're going to be crushing everyone who plays either bad or tight aggressive. What is with all the Arabic in the chat today? Are these bots, or are these people actually having a conversation in Arabic in my chat? Let me know. I don't know. This says you got to read the Harrington book one of these days. I would recommend against it. Don't spend your time reading things that are antiquated. All right. Now, solvers have come about, and they teach you how to play Game Theory Optimal. Now, there's been a lot of discussion recently as to whether or not you should play Game Theory Optimal or even strive to learn how to play Game Theory Optimal. And it's very important to understand that as all games progress, whether it be poker or chess or running track and field or playing football, you get closer and closer to game theory optimal as time progresses. This is why you see people running faster now than they used to, right? Every year, someone's running faster and faster and faster. Every year, people are playing more game theory optimal basketball. I mean, we see that happening in basketball right now, where they used to think you should just shoot from anywhere. Now, you either shoot very, very close shots, or you shoot three-pointers, right? Why are they doing this? Well, it's because that is closer to game theory optimal than what they were doing in the past. And if you don't play closer to game theory optimal, you're going to get demolished. So, in poker, I think it's very important to at least learn what rough game theory optimal poker looks like. What a lot of people get in their mind, though, is that game theory optimal play means you're playing like a robot. And you're perfectly balancing all of your strategies. And while, that is nice and true in the ideal world, we are not robots, we are mere humans. And so, over at pokercoaching.com, I teach a rough, easy to implement game theory optimal strategy where you're trying to balance your ranges based on, like whenever you're betting in a spot where you should have a range disadvantage, you want to have your betting range be mostly your very strong hands and your draws, right? And I discuss how to balance that. I discuss that in my book, Mastering Small Stakes, No Limit Hold'em, although that book really is not about small stakes. So, now, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that game theory optimal strategies should be adjusted to take advantage of your opponents. There's a feature called node locking in all of the game theory optimal programs that lets you assume what your opponent's doing correctly, and then it tells you how to adjust to take advantage of it. So, for example, say your opponent always check raises the flop with only the nuts. Well, if your opponent only check raises the flop with the nuts, you should fold everything, right? That's just good game theory optimal poker. You're figuring out what your opponent does wrong and you're exploiting them maximally. So, do not think that game theory optimal play is some sort of like mindless robotic play that does not adjust to anything. And realize that you are trying to maximally take advantage of whatever your opponent does wrong. And if your opponent does nothing wrong, if they play perfectly, you are still trying to maximally take advantage of them, but you can only take advantage of them for 0 equity. And that's okay. Sometimes the most you can win from someone is 0. Let's see, you love the coffee chat, you're in Australia. How does a person adjust from going back and forward in a tournament and cash game and so forth? I'm not sure what you mean, Glenn. I guess you're saying how do you always gain chips? And the answer is you can't. Sometimes you're going to lose. Is Mastering Small Stakes Poker Tournaments good for sit-and-goes? It does not discuss sit-and-go strategies. It does discuss how to play fundamentally sound, though, so I would tell you to check it out. Mike says, don't always blindly follow a chart. So, for example, game theory optimal strategy. Essentially, like let's say it folds to us on the button, and we know the players yet to act will play really, really nitty. This was actually the homework question on pokercoaching.com last month. Well, in that scenario, you should be raising essentially every hand on the button because they're going to fold way too much. You can immediately profit because they're going to defend too little. This is just good, fundamentally sound poker. Let's say instead, it folds to you on the button and the players in the blinds are maniacs. Well, now you very often need to tighten up quite a bit because you should expect to face aggression. That's actually the question for this month, which we're going to review in 45 minutes over at pokercoaching.com. So, if you're playing against maniacs, you need to tighten up so that you can defend better, right? And that's just good poker. That is game theory optimal poker. You are figuring out what your opponents do wrong and you are maximally exploiting them. You know they are going to play back at you a ton, therefore you adjust. And that's really where poker is today. Node locking in Pio Solver is genius to exploit other players. It's crazy how Pio overfolds if we take just a few combinations out of the villain strategy. Yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying earlier, right? Like, let's say the flop comes, you raise pre-flop, big blind calls, flop comes king, 10, 3. 2 hearts. Let's say your opponent always calls with their draws and only raises with the nut hands. King 10, pocket 3s, 10-3 suited if they have it. In that scenario, you should be folding a ton if they check raise you because you know they're not bluffing very much, right? That's just good, fundamentally sound poker. That is game theory optimal poker. You are maximally exploiting what they do wrong. It seems like, for some reason, people think you either must be an exploitative player or you must be a game theory optimal player. And that's just not how poker or life or any game works. Of course, you can just play and assume your opponent plays perfectly. And then whatever mistakes they make will give you value. And now, this is actually the real power in game theory optimal plays in my mind. Because when you're playing against very, very good opponents, which is what happens in the high-stakes games, very often you don't know what they do wrong, right? Like, let's say, for example, my opponent's supposed to continuation bet the flop 72% of the time in a certain situation. And then they actually only continuation bet 70% of the time. So they're making a tiny error. And this is the case with almost everyone. No one's playing perfect GTO. And we're all making tiny errors. In that scenario, what happens is the person who plays closest to GTO will win. So imagine we have a perfect GTO bot playing against someone who plays very close to GTO, but slightly wrong in random ways. Those random tiny errors are the edge that the perfect player makes. So, whenever you're playing against very good players and you don't know what they're going to do wrong, you can just play as close to GTO as you possibly can, and you will do well. That said, it's kind of obvious that a lot of players are playing a little bit too aggressively, a little bit too passively, etc. For example, everyone says that Stevie444 is by far the best player in the high-stakes tournaments. And you always ask them, well, what is he doing to win? And the answer is, he plays a little bit too aggressively. He basically takes every spot that could be a reasonable aggressive line. Okay, knowing that, what should we do? Well, we should call a lot, right? Because he's over-bluffing. And so far, I've had reasonable success in these scenarios, and, you know, his strategy will often lead to him getting big stacks and running over the table. Because in tournaments, if you're the big stack, you should be running over the table, right? And if you're a short stack or a medium stack, you should be playing tightly. And if you know your opponent should be playing tightly, you should be overly aggressive. And that's often the situation he finds himself in. And it works great, right? He's crushing everyone. So, in situations like that, you almost have to realize, all right, we're playing against an overly aggressive player. Are we going to try to maximize our EV by following ICM principles? Or are we going to realize we're sacrificing some equity in exchange for not having to continue to fold way too often, and also perhaps take over the big stack ourselves, which may lead to us having significantly more equity, because then we get to be the ones who run over people. And, you know, there's still a little bit of play in those scenarios, but at the end of the day, if you do play just closer to game theory optimal than your opponents, you will win more money than your opponents, assuming they are playing well and you don't know what they're doing wrong. And very often you don't know what your opponents are doing wrong. You just don't. A lot of people are very egotistical, and they think they know definitively what people do right and wrong. And I promise you, you do not. So many times, someone in my inner circle has presented me a hand, and they say, yeah, I think my opponent's never bluffing here. And then we get to the river, and it turns out they were bluffing. So what does that mean? If we think the opponents are never bluffing, but it turns out they had a bluff, that should make you realize, okay, my read of the situation was 100% wrong. Now, of course, you may say, by never, I mean rarely. But especially if they show up with some off-the-wall bluff, like some hand that they shouldn't even have, in their pre-flop range, and they decided to turn it into an absurd bluff, in those scenarios, you are making a gigantic error. Have I tried a GTO Plus program? I have never even heard of GTO Plus. We hear James in the background, yes. Do I know Takey Rivers? I don't know Takey Rivers. Coda says, you purchased my sit and go course. Yeah, I have a sit and go course where I go through and I play lots and lots of sit and goes at various stakes and give general advice for that. You say it's well worth it. Good. I think it's sit and go sngseries.com, I think. How would you approach the flop in the big blind when you check? Well, that's a humongous question. Very often it depends on the flop texture, depends on your range, depends on who has a range advantage, who has a range disadvantage, who has polarization advantage, right? I discuss all this in Mastering Small Stakes No Limit Hold'em. It would take me about 100 pages worth of text to explain it to you here, so we're not going to do it. Biggest day of the year for amateur players. Are you going to be playing somewhere today? Gregory, I have no clue what you're even referring to. Adjustment is the key, and it starts with being aware in the first place. Adjustments are the key against bad players, again. Or players who are trying to maximally exploit you. But again, whenever people play very well, if you play closer to game theory optimal than they play, you're going to win in the long run. Now, the long run is very big, variance is huge. As people get better and better, edges will diminish. There are a lot of games where no one has an edge, right? I mean, tic-tac-toe is the obvious example. All of you play perfect GTO tic-tac-toe. And it took you about 10 minutes to learn it, right? It's not hard. And that's an example of a game that no one will ever play for money, and that is a dead game, because it's so easy. Perfect GTO strategy is obvious. Now, if your opponent makes a mistake, you can obviously exploit it, and it's easy to. If they leave you an obvious win, you take the obvious win. And that's an example of you not perhaps reverting from standard GTO, because imagine you're always supposed to put your X in a certain square, but your opponent makes a blunder. Well then, you should exploit them, right? In poker is the same. All games are the same. I mean, checkers is the same. Connect 4 has been solved, right? Connect 4 is a game that appears very skill intensive until you learn perfect GTO, then you realize you're flipping. Poker is a game that appears to be very skill intensive until it's perfectly solved, and then you're flipping. And that's the case with essentially all skill games. At least games that don't require necessarily physical prowess, right? Because, for example, if you're just like taller and faster in basketball, you're going to win. If you're taller and faster in running, you're going to win. Assuming both runners are running perfect GTO. But that's not really the case in poker. The person who implements the perfect strategy better will win. Now, there are mental abilities that some people have way better than others, right? And that is the determining factor in who can play closer to GTO. But if we both have two robots playing for us that both play perfectly, we're both going to break even, right? Tony says, follow up on the GTO question. You guess your thinking is you only have trash in the big blind since you should raise your good hands. You should not raise your good hands. That's probably where you're going wrong. You're probably re-raising too often. And also, let's say the flop comes 8-7-6 and you're against an under-the-gun raiser. In that scenario, you have way more nut hands than they do, right? The best hand they can have is aces. So if the best hand they can have is aces, or maybe 7s or 6s, notice you have all the straights, all the 2 pairs, all the sets. And in that scenario, you have a big polarization advantage. You have more premium hands than they do, and all of your premium hands crush their premium hands. So that's a spot where you have a big advantage, and you should be exploiting that, right? And your opponent should realize this, and they should be doing a lot of checking behind, because they know they don't have a range advantage there. I have a video on YouTube, when to continuation bet and how much. So go through and read that, or go through and watch that, and that will give a very brief explanation of exactly that. It's not that hard. It's kind of hard, but not that hard. There are, of course, some corner cases I don't discuss in that video, which I go through and discuss at pokercoaching.com, but it's good. From early position, want to open a wider range to exploit the common theme that early position players only play strong hands, because you are taking your range against everyone else at the table. Even if everyone plays tightly, that's fine, because when they do play, you're going to be crushed. And you are out of position against everyone. You cannot get out of line from early position. If you play with any Game Theory Optimal program or talk with any person who is good, they will let you know that you cannot get out of line from early position because you are playing against the top 5% range of everyone. And it doesn't work that well. How do you deal with people at the table who are constantly harassing you in the hand? Call the floor man. Floor man doesn't do much because he's irregular. Be rude back to the person. Create a scene. Let the person know they're out of line. Cause a scene when they're in a hand. I mean, at some point you have to fight fire with fire. If you have a constant troll, whether it be in person or on the internet, if they will not leave you alone, at some point you must do something or realize this is what this environment is, and then don't go there, right? If, that's the environment in that card room and they will not do anything, let the floor person and the casino owner know that you are not playing here because of the hostile attitude and environment that card room harbors, and do not play there. At some point, you do have to vote with your feet. On the internet, it's easy. You can just block people. I think a lot of people they think blocking people may be offensive or childish or something, but realize you need to enjoy your time. And if someone is giving you problems on the internet, just block them. It doesn't even matter, right? And if you block them, you'll find that they simply cannot mess with you too much. And if they do, then they're just idiots, right? And anyone who follows those people are idiots. This happened recently. There was this guy who was trying to talk crap to me on the internet, and you just realize that anyone who follows this person is a fool. Or anyone who at least realizes this person is not a fool is a fool. And that's okay. Say okay. Realize that you do not have to support these people, you don't have to interact with these people, and it makes life easy. Crumb, yeah, I don't really show many bluffs. You found that the solvers do not bluff catch opponents who do not airball bluff and only bluff with equity. Right, you can't bluff people who only bluff with equity because they get there sometimes. So 5-bet bluff. You have to understand a lot of the airball bluffs are bluffs with equity. Very often you'll find that, I'll say an easy example. Say you raise middle position, big blind calls, flop comes 10-4-4. That's a spot where you are quote-unquote airball bluffing with queen high or jack high or, like a 6-5 of backdoor flush draw, right? I mean, those are not airball bluffs. Those are the obvious bluffs because they have equity, right? And very rarely the solvers are running just total airball bluffs. And when they are running airball bluffs, it is situations on the river where they have a blocker to your opponent's calling range. Why does everyone play so tightly online? Because they think they're playing Harrington on Hold'em, like I told you. They are playing Harrington on Hold'em strategy. If you've not listened to the first 27 minutes of this, go back and watch it. Or listen to it. You can listen to it on iTunes, watch it on YouTube, Twitch, whatever. We discussed why they all play tightly. Because they are playing a strategy that beats the absolute worst players. And your strategy is quite easy. Just play a little bit more loose and aggressive and you'll run them over and you'll crush them. But listen to what they're saying, because they usually just make it very obvious what hand they have. Dr. Mize said, you did one of the quizzes last night. You confidently clicked on the river decision and you got a nice red 0. Feels bad, man. You felt like I could be looking at you disapprovingly through the screen. Yeah, whenever you get a 0, feel like that. That is how you should feel. It's good when you get zeros, though, because that makes it clear that you are learning, right? Whenever you are playing any sort of quiz, and you presume the person who made the quiz knows what they're talking about, then when you get a 0 or a low score, realize that is a learning experience. That's not a failure for you. That is a learning experience. And if you're always getting the perfect score, you've probably mastered it, right, to some extent. And then you're just working on like tiny corner cases. But if you find you have a lot of holes in your game, then that's a great thing because it's really easy to improve. Very often, most people playing most games have just a few major leaks, a few major holes that they're not aware of. And if they can plug those few major leaks, they'll go from being a small loser to a small winner, just like overnight. I mean, this is the case with most of the people who come to me. They are, 2-5 no-limit players who are trying to win at 2-5 and get to 5-10. And they just have 3 or 4 holes in their game. They fix those 3 or 4 holes, they immediately start winning $50 an hour, and they're off to the races. It really is kind of it. All you have to do is just play well, and plugging holes is an easy way to play significantly better. Sometimes it's easy to think robotically about poker. It's easy to think robotically about most things. Kevin says, on the quizzes, you need better river decisions. You're going to find that most people play poorly on the turn and the river. Now, why do they play poorly on the turn and the river? There's an obvious answer for this. Sit there and think about it for a second. The reason is because you play fewer turns and rivers, right? Pre-flop, most everyone plays at least okay, although most people are still too tight. But most people play at least okay pre-flop. And the reason is because you see the pre-flop situations over and over, and there are fewer pre-flop situations, right? On the flop, people play okay. Then on the turn, you don't see very many turns. And then you also don't see very many rivers. You see fewer rivers than turns, therefore you should play the river worse very often. Now, the river is nice because there are no more cards to come. So perhaps you could justify saying people play turn worse than river. I don't really know. I don't have any stats in front of me. I'm just guessing. But I can guarantee you people play the turn and the river worse than they play the flop. And they play the flop worse than they play pre-flop. So you're going to find that when you do take my quizzes at pokercoaching.com, you very often get a worse score on the turn and the river. I've seen this across the board. It happens to pretty much everyone. And that's because you have less experience there. And that's really the purpose of the site, is to give you experience playing a wide range of situations, so that whenever you encounter these situations at the table, you at least have some idea of how to approach them, instead of you just sitting there guessing, right? What's the best, most discreet way to record hands at the table? Type them in your phone, clearly. I have a note, jonathanlittlepoker.com I have a note. I have a video on how I take notes at jlpoker.com/notes. And I explain how I take notes, either on a pad of paper. You can also do it in your phone exactly the same way. I actually use my phone to record all of my hands. And at the most recent tournament series I went to at Baha Mar in Montreal, and it worked fine. You got a perfect score on my most recent quiz and then got an email from me. That was probably random, but good. Sean says, we are live. Normally when you hear me, I'm just reading audiobooks or voicing quizzes. I am live. I'm live every Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. until I'm finished talking. Sometimes that's a short day, sometimes it's a long day. Today is going to be a short day, though, because I have to do a poker coaching webinar at 10 a.m., which is in 28 minutes. And I have to make sure that I am prepared. It's very important to be prepared. I need to go back through my homework answer, make sure I didn't screw anything up, and if I did screw something up, make sure I amend it. It's actually funny. Whenever I do the homework questions, and I'm reasonably good at this, even I will screw up from time to time. I'll just forget a hand or not account for something. And that's me with essentially unlimited time going through a question. Now imagine you're at the poker table and you're playing a situation for the first time. In what world do you think that you will be able to get that right the first time? Well, the answer is essentially never. And then, even if you do get it right, you may have gotten it right for the wrong reasons. And that's why it's important to study away from the table. A lot of people think, oh, if you just play a lot, you'll be fine. First off, when a lot of people play, they are not diligently thinking through everything. They're not trying to balance their ranges. Or they're also not trying to maximally exploit their opponents. They're just kind of like playing their cards. And, while it's nice to play your cards, and easy to play your cards, it is certainly not ideal. Do I have a link where you can send me hand histories for me to review? I do not do anything like that. I have the Inner Circle at pokercoaching.com/inner circle, where those people, every 2 weeks, I do every 2 weeks I do roughly a 4-hour call where I answer one in-depth question that they have. This next Inner Circle webinar is going to be discussing why people get a lot of chips early in tournaments, often cash game players, and why they fail so hard when stacks start to get relatively shallow, and how to make sure you don't fail once the stacks get shallow. And then we go through whatever questions they have. Usually it's a bunch of hand histories and a few mindset, bankroll type questions. And that's what I do with the Inner Circle. So you can check that out at pokercoaching.com/inner circle, but I do not review people's hand histories in videos. Besides that. If you're a professional player, you can take losses from tournaments against your cash game income, or are they both separate? No, you can take any. So listen, if you're smart, you're going to file as a professional gambler, okay? And that allows you some opportunities to find ways to win or lose money, especially towards the end of the year. But all poker winnings, even if you are only a professional poker player, it applies. They're all the same. They're not separate. That'd be like saying, are sit and goes different than tournaments, or different than cash games, or different than 5-10? Is that different than 2-5? No, they're all the same. And even if you're a recreational player, an amateur player, all of your gambling winnings, they all net out. You have to raise with a hand like King Queen suited. You think it's a good hand to call with, but occasionally you see some people raise and you're wondering why. So John, this probably depends on what they think about the opponent's strategy, right? Whenever you re-raise a hand like King Queen suited, you're essentially saying, I think I have a very strong range advantage with this because my opponents are going to be calling with all sorts of worse stuff and only 4-betting with premium hands. I guess you're referring to re-raising, right? Pre-flop, you should re-raise King Queen, or you should raise with King Queen suited and all of your hands the vast majority of the time. When someone raises in front of you, though, and you're deciding whether or not to re-raise, you're asking, will this person 4-bet me with only the nuts, right? If they only 4-bet you with aces, kings, queens, and ace-king, You can 3-bet king queen suited all day because when you get 4-bet, you know you're crushed and you can fold. And when they call, you know that you are often dominating them when they have king jack, king 10, whatever. So that is probably why people are doing it, or maybe people are re-raising just because they feel like re-raising. Very often, though, if you are 3-betting quite wide in general, just because you don't have much of a calling range, king queen suited will be in the top of your 3-betting range just because it is one of the best hands. You can only take losses up to your winnings. As far as I know, that's correct. If you are recreational, if you are professional, depending on how you file, I believe you can carry them forward for 3 years. Talk to an accountant. I have 2 accountants I know who are both very good. One is Teresa Fox, who I use. Another one is Ray Conler, who I talk to about poker on a regular basis, and he does great work for a lot of businesses I'm involved with. Love the diapers in the background. Well, they've been getting depleted, as you have seen over the last few days. We're going to have to get some more soon. Instead, we're replacing it with jewelry, shark toys, and clementines. But, you know, we'll get there. All right, well, I'm going to go get ready for my webinar at pokercoaching.com. You know, if you sign up right now, you can join me in the webinar. We'll be talking about that situation where you're against maniacs who are going to be out of position against you when you're on the button. We're going to be talking about that for probably the next 3.5 or 4 hours. So, it's a long day for me. I'm going to rest my voice, otherwise I won't be able to talk by the end of it. I want to thank you all for being here. Tomorrow, people wanted me to say what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. Man, I honestly don't know. It's kind of hard for me to know what I'm going to talk about. Maybe we'll talk about asking the right questions. Maybe we'll talk about maximizing fold equity. I don't know. You have to understand, whenever I do a little coffee, I kind of wake up and see how I feel. And like today, I made this presentation, the first 20 minutes of this, discussing how poker has changed, kind of on the fly. I like that. It's good practice for me because you never know what you're going to have to talk about, and it's good to be able to put together at least some sort of coherent discussion, or monologue in this case, on a topic at random. And I feel like I'm getting pretty good at this. Sometimes the answer is I don't know. Yesterday I had someone interview me who essentially asked me a bunch of random questions. They asked how poker is different than chess, how politicians bluff, what my biggest wins and losses were. It was sort of a all over the place interview, which is fine, but it's good because it made me be able to figure out on the fly, how do I think politics and bluffing goes together? And I don't really know. I'm not too into politics. But I tried to give a reasonable answer. And maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But as you get more and more practice, you'll get better and better at it. All right. Are we here every day at the same time? Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Sometimes I have to cancel. Like yesterday I had to cancel because my father-in-law he had a problem. And so I wasn't here yesterday. But I'm here the vast majority of the time, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. Whenever my second son arrives, we may decide we have to change the time. Maybe we have to cancel the show. I don't know. I'm going to try to make it work, though, because I think the 8 viewers here all appreciate it. Thank you to all 8 of you who are here. Yeah, I changed my shirt midway. No, I did not change my shirt today. I do sometimes, but not today. All right, to all of you, have a great day. Enjoy yourselves. Be nice to someone. Don't be a troll. Enjoy yourselves, and I will talk to you